Welcome back. There appears to be no end in sight to Europe's current energy crisis as it looks ahead to the colder months of the winter. For more on this, I have Sebastien Falletti here in the studio. Sebastien, it's good to have you back.
Good morning.
I also have Andres Sanchez Braun here in the studio as well. Andres, it's great to see you here.
Thanks for having us here.
Sebastien, we'll start with you. Let's begin with the situation in France. I understand France itself is far less dependent on Russian fuel as compared to some of its European counterparts. Do you care to elaborate?
Well, the whole EU is extremely dependent on Russian gas. Of course, France is overall in a better situation. Overall, just to give you some figure, the EU is relying on almost 40% of its gas from Russia, while France today is around 17%. So it's on the lower hand. Because why is this situation? Because France has invested massively on nuclear energy for a long time. So the majority of its electricity is coming from its nuclear plant. Having said that, still France is facing major challenges, especially ahead of winter, and President Macron is on a hot spot. He's facing mounting criticism at home for a so-called lack of preparation, for not having support enough the nuclear industry. And so even yesterday he had a press conference where he tried to confront those criticisms, but he has been dramatizing the situation to the French public, saying that you should be prepared for a harsh winter. And he didn't rule out some rationing in the worst case scenario. So clearly this is going to be the major issue for the coming months, politically and also geopolitically and economically. And France is no different from the rest of the EU, even though it has probably a kind of a buffer thanks to the strong nuclear energy production capacity.
Right. And Andres, what can you tell us about the situation in Spain? I understand Spain has been witnessing record electricity bills well before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What more can you tell us about this reality?
That is right, what you're pointing at. Actually, I'd like to say that Spain is dependent on Russian gas on a very, very, very small proportion, actually, which is funny. We, I believe, only import 2% of our natural gas comes from Russia. We mostly buy it from northern African countries, mainly Algeria and the United States. But as you pointed out, why were electricity bills soaring way before the war started? Well, I think there's a number of reasons that actually overlap. One would be, of course, the fact that, gas prices were already going up because of, recovery as the pandemic eased out. Then also the fact that emission rights, which you have to pay, of course, in the EU, when, let's say, a factory or an electrical generator generates these tons of CO, you have to pay rights for those emissions. Those were also skyrocketing in 2021. And the third reason would be there was also a bill passed in 2019 that actually modified the way that you, let's say, apply what is called a variable rate when you get your electricity bill. There's two types of rates. One is the variable one, which is highly linked to market fluctuations. So around 40% of households, I believe, have this kind of electrical rate in Spain, and those were the ones hit the hardest. So all in all, I would say in 2021, I believe the electricity bill average rise was around 40%, which was a lot.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Sebastien, back in France now, do correct me if I'm wrong. I understand roughly 70% of the electricity in France is generated by nuclear power. Yeah. That is correct. And out of the total of 56 nuclear reactors in France right now, 32 are not being operated.
Exactly. So more than half of these plants are not operating now. And this is the big challenge ahead for France, for the government, is that now the president of the French government has promised that they will bring back all those reactors in function by the end of winter, by February 2023. And now there's a big question about whether this is feasible.
Is it feasible?
So that's the big question. The government claims it's possible, but there is a problem of manpower. The main production company, so-called EDF, is complaining and criticizing the government, the previous government, including Emmanuel Macron, who was Ministry of Economy in the previous capacity, and who had closed down some of the plant. And now they are saying, EDF is saying, look, we have sacked a lot of people because we were told that we should phase out nuclear energy, and now you're asking us to, in emergency, reopen those plants, and we don't have the people. So there is at the moment a bit of a guerrilla between the government and EDF, but they are saying that it will be possible at least to reopen most of them by the end of the year, and then 5 more by February. But some experts are still questioning whether this is actually going to happen, because some of these reactors facing some issue of corrosion are very old. So there is also a safety dimension here, to what extent you can reopen in haste those reactors. So I think this issue is going to drag on over the winter. You're going to see more on this. So let's see if the government can deliver on its promise. And it's a key issue, because if they can't deliver, then that will increase the risk of energy cut, potential rationing.
Right. And while that is the situation over in France, Andres, in Spain, what efforts are being made on the national front there to address a potential energy crisis this winter?
Well, actually, 2 things have been done so far. One is actually a bill that was passed this summer that basically puts a cap on, let's say, the temperatures you can set on your heating systems or your aircon. This, of course, doesn't affect households. It's just a recommendation for households, but it's mandatory for public transportation, for shops, for restaurants, for workplaces, for government buildings, and basically it means that you cannot. When it comes to heating, for example, you cannot go beyond 19 degrees when you set your thermostat. Or when you use the AC, you have to keep the room at 27 degrees Celsius. So, of course, the government believes that every degree that we're not lowering or increasing the temperature saves around 7% of natural gas reserves in this case. That's one thing that was done. The other thing was one thing that Portugal and Spain negotiated with the EU, and it's the so-called Iberian exception. It's a little convoluted, but we were talking before of how there's 2 kinds of electrical bills. You can apply for a fixed one, or you can apply for a variable one, which is the one that is completely linked to the wholesale market of electricity. So what has been done is they're putting a cap on the prices of all electricity being produced through natural gas for these variable rates that you get. How do we compensate then all these electrical companies producing electricity through gas and obviously losing money if they have to sell it below their market price? Well, basically what they did was they slapped a fixed average tax to those households that actually have the fixed rate, because normally those households are normally higher income households. So that is kind of compensating the increase in electricity bills this year. So far, the increase has been around 20%, which is around 12 to 15% less on average than what we're seeing in other European countries. So actually, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez suggested to the European Union that maybe this system that is going to be applied only up until May next year, maybe should be something that the EU as a whole should contemplate in applying for the time being in order to
right, as a possible alternative
to avoid rationing and to keep electrical bills a little,
steady relatively then.
Relatively.
Now, beyond Spain and France, over in the UK, to quote the words of one media outlet, it's a matter of eating or heating, let alone showering. For more on this dire reality, I have David Cox live on the line. David, it's been a while. It's great to see you again.
It's great to thanks for having me on the show, Sunny.
Right, David, I hear the phrase fuel poverty has become quite prevalent there. How severe is the situation in England?
Well, as you just said, Sunny, the UK is in a very difficult situation. at the moment. We've already seen petrol prices rising a lot this year due to the consequences of the war in Ukraine. And now over the next 6 months, electricity and gas prices are going to soar. So there's some predictions which suggest that 40% of the people in the country could be struggling to afford their energy bills this autumn. And people in the poorest and the coldest parts of the UK are going to be affected most. So it's not good at the moment. I mean, the NHS is warning that there could be some serious health consequences this winter, with some people forced to choose between either skipping meals or heating their homes. And then the other thing is that the energy bill rises are also pushing up the cost of food in the supermarket or restaurant prices as shops and businesses kind of pass on these price rises to their consumers. So it's all just fueling this kind of big cost of living crisis we're seeing at the moment.
Right, and David, very briefly speaking, the UK, it's said to be the worst affected by the global energy crisis. That being said, what appears to be making the UK so vulnerable?
But there's a few reasons. So the first is that a lot of our homes have really poor insulation. So the UK probably has the least energy efficient homes in Western Europe. And the other big reason is that we still rely extremely heavily on gas to heat homes and produce electricity at this time when the Ukraine war has sent gas prices soaring. So as we heard earlier in the program, like other European countries like France and Spain use much more nuclear or wind or solar energy, which produce electricity at much lower prices. But the problem is that 85% of UK homes use gas for heat. So that's the big reason why we've been affected particularly badly by this crisis.
Right, and keeping that in mind, David, what are the prospects of winter blackouts there in the UK to address energy shortages? And what measures, perhaps, are being considered by the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, as she seeks to ease the energy crunch and soaring inflation, of course?
Well, in her speech yesterday, Liz Truss, she ruled out rationing UK power, but a lot of people still think it is possible that we will have blackouts this winter, and that might turn out to be inevitable. So right now, Liz Truss she's considering like a freeze on energy bills. That seems to be the main option available to her, with the government basically subsidising the bills of just ordinary consumers and small businesses over the next few months. But in the longer term, there's a variety of plans which are being considered, such as trying to use more renewable energy, perhaps building more facilities for storing gas, and then as a last resort, the government taking over and operating energy services until the whole crisis is over. But we will have to see in the coming days what measures she will announce.
I see. All right, David, thank you so much for that. Thank you for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, back here in the studio then, Sebastien. France, as you mentioned earlier, is looking ahead to the possibility of rationing this particular winter. What are the chances of that happening?
Well, that's one issue that has been faced by the president himself yesterday at the press conference. He openly said that there was a risk, he couldn't rule it out. He called on the country, on the population to rally against his measure to make sure they can avoid that dark scenario. But he said that in the worst case scenario where you would see Russia totally cutting off gas supply to Europe, combined with a very harsh winter, then you could, in that scenario, see some rationing in France. And that would mean, of course, a lot of political uncertainty, because, of course, that would be a very drastic measure that hasn't been seen for decades, and in the current context, that could be a political hot potato, if I may say. And maybe I would add one more thing about the economy, as to follow up on Andres, is that one dimension in this whole crisis is the fall of the euro, which is both a symptom and a cause of what we are facing in this energy crisis. Because, of course, the energy crisis brings the euro down because Europe is extremely dependent on import. But also, the more the euro falls, the more it's expensive for Europeans to buy. And you know that now the euro is at its lowest point in 20 years. And I think that's the bigger picture that is really important to keep in mind, is that this factor is making the crisis much more acute. And of course, it's beyond energy. It's also about political standing in the world. It's also about economic standing for the Eurozone.
It really is. It's a bigger problem. Andres, Spain, in the meantime, it's pushing to become the EU's energy hub through the revival of plans to build a pipeline connecting the Iberian Peninsula, via France that is, to Central Europe. Do tell us a bit more about this possible undertaking.
Well, basically this plan, as you said, revived. The main two actors here interested in having this project done are Spain and Germany right now, mainly. Why would they want to turn Spain into an energy hub, as you mentioned, or a gas reservoir, if you might? Well, the reason is because Spain is actually the country with the higher regasification capacity in the EU. This means it has all the facilities that turn LNG, liquefied natural gas, into gas again and actually store it. That's the biggest capacity in Europe, and it's actually an alternative for countries like Germany, who were highly dependent on Russian gas, to actually start getting it from, just as Spain does, Northern Africa or the US, for example. This project was supposed to be built originally in 2019, but it was discarded because of it apparently being highly inefficient and extremely costly. The thing is that actually President Macron yesterday in this press conference that you were mentioned actually said he is not interested in the idea at all. Why? Because according to him, there's already two other pipelines working between Spain and France on the western side of the border. They actually are not pumping enough gas, according to the data. He said, if we're not even using those ones in the west, why are we going to build another one in the east that is extremely costly? And his argument was that Europe actually needs electricity interconnectivity and not to share more gas, especially when the EU set a series of emission targets for the 2030, 2050, right, target years. In his opinion, we're actually trashing these goals. And then the other argument that was being given in this sense is that the pipe could also be used in the future, if refurbished, to move hydrogen from one side to the other. But then again, that is actually extremely costly. There is a plan B, though. And it could be that if France does not accept this pipeline, then Italy might, if it goes undersea. But we shall see what happens in the next few months.
Right, so it's still quite uncertain then. Sebastien, an emergency EU energy meeting will be held in Brussels on September 9th. What has been shared about its agenda thus far?
Well, basically it's the rotating Czech presidency, because currently it's Czech Republic who's in charge of the EU presidency. We call that emergency meeting because precisely this issue of energy crisis, as we are discussing now, is becoming the central political issue in the whole continent. And the Czech minister said that we need to fix the energy market in Europe, and this is a very structural issue that has been discussed for years. So basically, they are trying to say we should look beyond short-term emergency measure and try to build a proper, cohesive European market-wide response. But this is going to be the big challenge, because this energy crisis is putting to the test the unity of the EU again. And you have, of course, a tension between people who say we should find a solution at the European level, and some other who say let's focus on our national interest. And why do we have all these sanctions on Russia, and all people are paying the cost for this? So this is going to be much more than a technical issue. So there are this hot discussion going on next week in Brussels, including cap on gas price and also interconnectivity between countries, like Andres discussed about Spain, France. And so also from France, Macron said yesterday that he was open to help Germany to get some gas. In return, Germany could offer some electricity in case of emergency. So it's going to be a lot of measures to push for a more European cohesion. But the truth is, you can see that countries have different dependence on Russia. So they don't have the same interest, as we just see with Spain, for example, and France. So we're probably going to see a lot of negotiation, and it's going to be very hard. It's only the beginning of the process. We don't expect like a major decision as early as next week. It's probably going to continue
quite a
for
while.
a long time, as the EU is known for.
Right, I see. Well, hopefully they'll come up with a consensus in the near future then. Well, that is all the time we have for this edition, I think. So thank you so much for being with us today,
Thank you for your
Sebastien and
invitation.
Andres.
Thank
Thank you
you so
very
much
much
for
for your
having us here.
insights.